So I write this essay about Dwight Eisenhower for one purpose: to demonstrate to you that Ike had the will in spades to vote for regime change as regards to JFK, and he had the cunning to disguise his true lack of remorse in doing so. Any man who can starve to death 800,000 disarmed enemy forces will not bat an eyelash in taking out one man. Eisenhower had to be consulted. To not consult him and risk exposure would be foolhardy. One word of dissent from Ike regarding the Warren Commission findings, and this conspirator's goose would be cooked. Of course, the conspirators need not have worried. On that commission sat Eisenhower associates such as John McCloy and Allen Dulles. They had all known each other through World War II and beyond. They were members of the club. Well, just who were these men on the commission? Internationalists all, law violators many. Gerald Ford, the seemingly innocuous and folksy representative from Michigan, was not so innocuous at all. He was a Yale man, a trusted man. For moving the wound on Kennedy's back to comport with Arlen Specter's silly and impossible single bullet theory, he was rewarded with the presidency. He should have been disbarred. John McCloy, the corporate lawyer who rose from meager means to run with the swift, was a threat to personal liberties. And yes, he was a major violator of the Fourth Amendment. He was a Harvard man, a trusted man. He was a man who conducted illegal wiretaps in the interwar years, a man who illegally and immorally interned Japanese Americans in prison camps during World War II. Well, what else would you expect from someone who had risen to such lofty heights? Earl Warren, appointed to the Supreme Court by Eisenhower, bent the Constitution this way and that to fundamentally change the character of the nation. Quite frankly, he turned the Constitution upside down. He took prayer out of schools. He let criminals spring free because of technical violations. He was a Berkeley man, a trusted man, an Eisenhower man, regardless of Ike's hollow misgivings. Allen Dulles, who cheated on his wife more prolifically than JFK, which is no small feat, was a man who protected Nazis, a man who invaded and disrupted the governments of so many nations. He was a Princeton man, a Sullivan and Cromwell man, a United Fruit Company man, a trusted man. Most importantly, he was an Eisenhower man. Lyndon Johnson, the president who selected the men for the commission, was the man who worked with Eisenhower to defeat the Bricker Amendment, which was intended to limit presidents from making unilateral treaties that might theoretically supersede the Constitution. Lyndon Johnson was a trusted man, and he too was an Eisenhower man. He fit in nicely with Ike's doctrine to rule from the center while marginalizing the extreme wings of both parties. This was called the middle way. Hale Boggs, the representative from Louisiana, who was the youngest member of the commission, was a man who was accused of being in the American Student Union, which was felt to be a communist front. If so, that would put him in good stead with Eisenhower, who didn't seem all that concerned about communists in government until Joe McCarthy forced him to do something about it. Hale Boggs, whose daughter Cokie Roberts happily followed father's establishment footsteps, was a trusted man. Boggs worked with Eisenhower and Albert Gore Sr. to ultimately create the Federal Aid Highway Act, which gave rise to the interstate highway system. Ike justified that as necessary to national defense. Troop movement, I suppose. John Sherman Cooper was another Eisenhower man, just the type of internationalist who Eisenhower liked. He was a Republican who was also liked by Democrats. Harry Truman appointed him as a delegate to the United Nations. He also served as a special assistant to Secretary of State Dean Acheson during the formation of NATO. Later on, Eisenhower appointed him as ambassador to India. When Eisenhower needed him to run for Senate when Alben Barkley died, Cooper complied. I'll do anything for my godfather. Quite obviously, John Sherman Cooper was a trusted man. Not surprisingly, he had a degree from Harvard and Yale. All these men were trusted men. Moreover, they were Eisenhower men. They weren't Johnson men. They were Eisenhower men. The only man in the commission who wasn't 100% in Eisenhower's camp, Richard Russell, was certainly in the internationalist camp as it pertains to America running its Cold War all over the globe. Richard Russell was placed specifically on that commission by Johnson to be Johnson's man to tell Johnson what was going on in that committee. Maybe Lyndon was afraid they would pin the assassination on him. Thus was the Warren Commission assembled. It should have been more appropriately named the Eisenhower Commission. And although we don't hear much from Eisenhower regarding the assassination, my gut tells me that he was working behind the scenes, just as he did in World War II, just as he did in taking down Joe McCarthy, coordinating the mop-up, freely giving advice to associates on how best to handle a situation, a talker, or a rabble-rouser. Ike's silence regarding the JFK assassination speaks volumes. The President of the United States is assassinated, and Ike has barely a word except for the day that Kennedy was shot? Unlikely.